This is a story about the value of science. And science works best when you're not trying to prove something, but you're actually trying to disprove something. So back in the 1990s, even back then, parents were talking about their kids being addicted to video games. And I thought, that can't be right. Because addiction doesn't just mean you do something a lot. It means you're doing it in a way that's damaging your functioning. And it can't just damage your functioning in one area. It has to be damaging your functioning across multiple areas to rise to the level of clinical significance. And I thought, that can't be what's going on. So I initially started studying this back in 1999, trying to actually show that this wasn't happening. And the more I studied it, the more I realized I was wrong. That in fact, there are some kids who take serious damage to their lives because of the way in which they're gaming. And so what does that look like? Well, it means that perhaps their school functioning is suffering. And that has serious long-term consequences, right? That can change what college you get into, or if you even get into a college, which can change your career. So these are ripples that, just they look at the time, maybe like they're a small little issue, but in fact they can be very serious in their long-term repercussions. You can damage your relationships with your family. One of the symptoms is lying about how much you're gaming. And in fact, that can damage the trust for a very long time among family members and have serious ramifications. So it turns out that some kids, and what that percentage is, we're not exactly sure, because different studies measure different populations, they use different definitions. The number seems to be somewhere between 1 and 10%. In our study, which was a national study of children 8 to 18, we found that about 8.5% of youth gamers would classify as addicted at this clinical level. And so that means over 90% can play games and they're not having a problem. That makes sense. That's what most mental health issues are. Most people don't have it. But that doesn't mean it's not important for those ones who do. And so we sometimes ask the question, well, is it a primary problem or a secondary problem? Maybe the gaming is just a symptom of something else, like the kid's depressed, and so they game as a way of coping with that. And we studied 3,000 children for 3 years, and we found exactly the opposite there. That in fact, when kids became addicted to games, their depression increased, their anxiety increased, their social phobias increased, their grades got worse. If they stopped being addicted over the years of this study, then we saw the opposite pattern. Their depression lifted, their anxiety lifted, their social phobias lifted. So it looks like the gaming can actually lead some of these other problems. Now, we're not really sure that it is leading, because with only measuring once per year, we don't really know what's going on in there. But I think it does show that at least it's truly comorbid, that when you get one problem, often you get others, and they can push each other around, make each other worse. It does show that the gaming's not simply a symptom of one of these other issues. So these are some of the studies that started showing me that it really is a serious problem for some kids. Now that leaves one question answered, but it opens up many others. Who's at most risk? We don't really know that. It does seem that if kids are more impulsive, if they have lower social competence, if they're already spending more time with games, maybe they're at higher risk. But there isn't one profile of who's most at risk. And the other side, what type of treatment is most effective? Well, here's where the World Health Organization's statement of including gaming disorder in the ICD-11 is so important. Until it's recognized as a real problem by the medical community, you can't really get help. No one's treating it. Insurance won't pay for it. And so now that it's being recognized as a bona fide problem, hopefully now treatments will become more available. We can start studying what types of treatments are most effective. I tend to think that it's an impulse control disorder. Now, not everyone agrees with me, and this is simply my opinion. But I think it's like that, where you should do your homework, but you just can't stop playing. You know that you should go to bed, but just one more level. So you're not able to manage that impulse. And so perhaps if your kid is having problems with this, finding a therapist who's good at treating impulse control disorders, that might be a good way to do it, because there aren't many specialists yet in treating this specific disorder because it is so new.